Okay, we're kind of in the middle of this, but just want to make a video on this Downeaster salter that we've been having some problems with this morning. So we isolated the spinner by getting the chain off and determining that wasn't binding. Something's binding, it's stopping the motor from turning. Then we disconnected the gearbox here, and the actual motor itself, bearings are good, motor turns freely, there's no play, there's no grinding. And then we're turning this with a pipe wrench, and like this should be very easy to turn. It's like a 60-to-1 gear ratio, so when you turn this, it turns the feed in the bottom, and we were turning it, and every so often it would bind and then go and then bind. So something's going on in this gearbox, we're pretty sure, and this is a lot more loose than it should be, this shaft. So right now we're just we're taking the bolts off to see, basically to take the bolts off, we're just heating the nut on the back, and they look like this. So there's 4-6 bolts going through, and they're lock nuts on the back. So we're heating the lock nuts and melt plastic, and they actually come out pretty easily with an impact. So we'll work on that, get the last bolt out, and then we'll show you what's inside. Okay, there. Okay, so we can case off.
Wonder if that might be the problem right there.
Well, okay, so upon closer inspection, it's really bad, but like, I mean, the salter's not worth much to me, and it's not like a super critical one, so we're gonna try and just fix it without pulling this gearbox off, without getting all up in here and taking all that off, and the other bearing, everything's gonna be rusted on and everything. So we're gonna replace that bearing right there, and we're going to clean out the case. We're going to replace the end bearing, clean this gear, replace that bearing, replace that seal, and, well, may replace the shaft and sprocket, but we'll see what it's like once we take it apart. So once I get all the parts together, I'll show you guys the part numbers. And there's the end cap, and that's part of a bearing. So I think for what the parts are going to be worth, I think it's worth trying. Okay, so I got the casing cleaned a little bit. You can see that there's the outer bearing race still in there. So that would be the outer bearing race of that bearing there. So I'll have to pull this bearing off here, pull the race out of the casing, and then this race came off as well. This one goes on to here. Then you got your snap rings that would go there and there. So next step here is I'm going to remove this bearing and this one by cutting it first, and then cleaning everything up a little bit, and then I'm also going to remove the race out of there. And then we'll see how everything looks, and we'll see if this this worm gear here can actually come off, or if it's right onto this shaft permanently. So we'll do that now. Okay, so I've got the inner race here, and I see a little lip right there that I think we might be able to get the slide hammer on, so we'll try that next. It's moving. Oh yeah, see it's coming out there? Okay, so it is coming out, nice. So hopefully we can get a number off that. I see a little something, so we'll clean it up. Okay, so on this one, I don't know if it'll focus, but I see 302.05. So we'll write that down. We'll use it in our search for the new bearings. Okay, so after removing the cotter pin, the snap ring from the bottom, I had to figure out how to get this worm gear off of the shaft. So thought about it for a while, and I think the best way is going to be to put it in the press. And my press came with these plates with these notches in it. So what I'm going to do is put it up in through here like this, rest the gear on it, make sure it's centered. And then I'm going to push the shaft through, and these should hold it. And I've also just put penetrating oil and stuff. I can see there's a key there. So this thing is not machined onto this. This has just been slid onto the shaft. So we'll push that through, and it'll make our lives a lot easier, because I don't think it'll be very easy removing the sprockets for the chain. Okay, yeah, that actually worked. Wow, that went a long ways though. Okay. Keep pushing till we're flush. It's a lot easier now with that oil. Okay, so now we're flush with the ring. I'm gonna back it off, and I'll put like a spacer that's smaller than the diameter of this to keep pushing it through. There we go. Okay, so that's the spinner assembly. We're going to replace all that. Okay, so the case also has these 4 screws, 2 here, 2 down there, that allow you to access or put oil or grease into the case. So what I'd like to do is actually put grease fittings on here so that I can just fill this box with grease and keep pushing the salt water out, the dirt out all the time, so you can actually see it squirting out. So yeah, so like see that's stripped out. And that's stripped out too. So what we're gonna have to do, we'll drill it out, use basically one of these things. It's like a reverse, what's it called? These bolt extractors, drill this out and get that out. Okay, so we're back here. Just received all the parts and some extras and some extra things I'm going to do. So painted the casing, just kind of wire brushed all the rust off, and then pulled out the old hex cap screws there and replaced them with these grease zerks. Now what we're going to do is we're going to try and fill this whole thing with gear oil, because all the new seals we're going to be putting in are going to be okay, but I'm just not sure about the seal that's behind this gear right here. So we'll try with gear oil, and if it leaks out the back, then we'll switch to grease. So that's why I put these on. So if we're filling with oil, we'll just pull those out, fill with gear oil. If grease, we'll just apply grease right there with a grease gun. Okay, so there's that. And then, so this is laid out the way that everything goes onto this shaft. You got your oil seal. So I was able to get the oil seal part number off the old one, and there it is from Canada Bearings at the top there. TC25 by 52 by 8 millimeters. Pretty standard seal. Then you've got the old snap ring. You've got the new top bearing. They're cone bearings, and they are part number 30205. And this bearing, and this bearing, which goes, that last one goes right on to here. They're all the same part number. Then you've got your existing smaller snap ring that goes on to this right here. You've got your gear, the existing one. Again, that cone bearing. This is the key. Goes in there. Other snap ring, dust cap. So that's the way everything goes on. So we're going to be pressing all that onto this shaft. So I'll show that. Some new features that I kind of came up with, or feature I guess, is this plate. So this is going to be going on to here before anything else. So I've got a 1-inch hole cut in it, and it's, well, I'll tell you guys the diameter of that after. I'm not sure exactly what it was. But what that's going to do, and I think it's going to work, is basically it's going to shield this little seal here from all the debris that falls on it, because I noticed that's kind of what makes this fail, is when you've got the salter running, you've got debris falling on top of it here, and it just sits in this pocket, and then eventually it's just sitting there so much that it just makes its way past the seal, fills this whole thing with salt and dirt and crap, and then it fails. So we got to keep it away from the seal. So I'm going to use this little cap. Hopefully that works out. So I'm just going to tack weld it onto this once everything's all said and done. And then you'll notice I've got the shaft marked right here. That is actually exactly where the oil seal sits when everything's back into place. And the reason I marked that is because I went a little bit above and beyond. Wasn't sure I was going to do this or not because this part's kind of expensive. This is a $40 seal repair. So if you've never seen one of these, basically they make them in every different size you can imagine. This particular one is by Speedy Sleeve, SKF, and the part number is 99098. And all that is just to repair that pitted area. And you can see that's where the old seal used to ride because of all the scoring right at that point. So because the shaft on this is so bad, and I don't want to replace this and obviously get a new shaft and everything with the keyway and all, and the little snap ring groove already in it, I don't want to get that new. So I'm going to repair the area where the oil seal rides, and that's what this is for. So what you do is you put this onto the end, and then you use this installation tool that it comes with, and you just hammer it down till it gets to that point, and then you've essentially re-established that 25 millimeter outside diameter, and the new seal has a brand new stainless steel area to ride on, and obviously will last a lot longer than if it were trying to seal that. So I'll show you how to install that. It's also good for like wheel bearings and anything where there's a seal, somewhere there's a seal riding. So good thing to have. And like I said, they have them in all different sizes. So yeah, you're definitely going to want to mark where that goes and show you how to install that. And because ours is so pitted, just before the sleeve gets down to that point, we're going to cover this with like a JB weld. And what that'll do is it'll seal all the really deep holes around the back of that new seal. Okay, so step one, we're gonna put the little cover I made over here. So that's on. Next thing will be the speedy sleeve. So hopefully this goes well. So you're gonna start it like this. There. This is the install tool, and then I'll switch to a piece of pipe, same diameter. So I just got 1 inch gas pipe here, or just pipe. Okay, we're almost to the point where we need to stop. So we need to have it between those 2 marks. So this is the time I'm going to put the JB Weld on. This is a JB Weld, it's like a metal filler. So I'm just going to put that on the pitted area, just like that. And what that'll do is it'll just seal the new sleeve to this old shaft here. And you're not going to need a lot because it's going to get squeezed out pretty well. Okay, so we've got our little cover plate we're going to use. We've got the oil seal over top. Next we're going to press the first bearing into place. So got to make sure you put the race on first. Make sure it's nice and clean. Goes in this orientation like that. And then we've got the bearings themselves. So the first one's going to go on in this direction here, and I'm just going to put a little bit of anti-seize on the shaft here. One makes the installation a lot easier, and if we ever have to remove this stuff, it'll be easier. Not a ton, just a little bit. And then I got these pieces of pipe here I'm just going to use to 1 inch pipe to push this down the shaft. It's not going to take much force because we've got the lubrication, and the tolerances aren't that tight. So we'll tighten up the jack here. Start pressing this down, and we're basically trying to get it so that the top of this bearing is below this where the C-clip goes. And if we have to, we'll push it back. Now, see right there, it actually just jumped. It's going on so easily. Okay, so we're below the groove, and that's how the bearing rides. So we'll put the C-clip on next. Make sure it's in the groove. Like that. And then we're going to push our worm gear down onto it. Oh, we got to install our key first. Key here, so we're just going to hammer this in on the vise. Right there. Okay, then our gear. I'm just going to have to hammer that key in a little bit, and then that should slide down. Just like that, and then we'll push it the rest of the way with the press. We're going to press it down till this is flush or sitting, pressing on the C-clip. I'm just pumping this by hand right now, so it's not too much force to get it on. And then right there I feel a little bit of resistance from the C-clip, so we'll back this off. And the final step will be the outside, or bottom I guess, bearing, and it goes on that way. So yeah, there you go, it's pretty, doesn't even need to be pressed on. Okay, so that'll ride with that on there. Okay, so I want to put this bearing on first before we mess with any of that. So same thing, a little bit of anti-seize. And then we'll place that on there. And I've already greased this up just so I don't have to do it afterwards. That feels like it there. Okay, and then we'll install the race on the inside of the casing now. Same idea with this. Got the race in there, a little bit of anti-seize. Got the old one using to hammer on. Just going to kind of go around. Okay, so we're flush and we're seated right down the bottom. All the way. Okay, so we're gonna hold this bottom bearing race and it's up in here, and we're gonna kind of just push that C-clip in there so that it catches, it kind of just sits in there with friction like that. And it's kind of hard to do this, but it's because the bearing sticks a bit, so we gotta turn the gear so we're up as tight as we can get, and then install the lower C-clip. Again, it's gonna be a little tight just because tolerancers are pretty tight. So I'm going to use my C-clip pliers for this one. Switch them. I'm gonna pull this in and hopefully wiggle it in. Okay, so we are in the groove there. So that's kind of the orientation of everything. Everything's a little crooked right now, but I think it'll fix itself up once I put the cover on, because the cover obviously won't go on unless everything is perfectly lined up. So we're trying to get the cover to line up into this side of the C-clip and this side onto that and over this whole bearing pack. We'll make sure our seal is where we want it. So basically we want it so that the main sealing point is right on that new collar we installed. So I'd say about there. And then we'll install our cover. I might actually move the, I might actually turn this more this way so it's a little bit of an easier groove to get the cover on. Okay, so I got some gasket maker on the cover here. We're gonna put everything together. Hopefully it goes in smoothly. So I'm just kind of lining up the C-clip channel first, because that's going to be the most, I think, the most difficult part to line up. It's going on pretty nice there. See, everything's tight, squeezing out the stuff. Okay, we'll put a couple bolts in and we'll see if we can turn everything. Okay, I'm just gonna put three of these bolts in for now, just to pull everything together. So I'm just turning it here and everything's turning like very smoothly. Like I'm just turning this by hand. Before that was like impossible. And I could see the salt feeding belt on the inside moving ever so slowly. So it's definitely connected, working, seems like very well. So I'm gonna install the rest of the bolts. Okay, so just before I install the dust caps, I wanted to show you guys what it looks like up in there. So you can see there's the bearing and there's the C-clip seated nicely in the groove. A little bit of sealant squeezing out, so that's a pretty good sign. And then put just a little bit of sealant on that dust cap right there, and we'll push that up into place, and then we'll fill it with gear oil. Okay, let it harden overnight. Just gonna pump it up with some gear oil. I just got this Mercury gear lube. Not too concerned about what's in it as long as it's lubricated. So fill it from here. Okay, so next step, we're going to be repairing the spinner assembly. So we're going to do new bearings, new shaft, and new sprocket. So first step, I'm going to be welding this new sprocket onto this hub here. We'll get to that. Oh. Okay, so I just put the old one beside the new one and lined up these blocks, and we should be good to go. So all I gotta do is weld the spinner, the old spinner, onto the end there, and we'll install it back in and we'll hook the chains up. Okay, so we got everything back together. Spinner's on. Just show you guys up in here in case you're wondering what the belt routing or chain routing is like. So we go from the spinner to the lower sprocket on the gearbox there, and then there's your tensioner on the right hand side. So you just loosen those two bolts right there and you can tension your spinner chain. And then your drive goes from the motor there on the left to the upper gearbox sprocket there. And then you tension that one by loosening the bolts under the motor there and just pulling it in that slot. And then you're good to go. So yeah, everything works pretty well. I've got it all oiled up, probably just gonna put it away for this year, but I'll just quickly plug it in and show you guys. It's pretty loud. Just have it on this battery. And it's hanging right now, so it's gonna try to spin.